Okay, so hi everyone, good afternoon. Mark, it's a pleasure to be here. Last time I met Mark I was a graduate student, so it was a few years back. And so it's great to see you again, and really thanks for the invitation. This paper is co-authored with Ola Pell-Kreuzer, who's here. He's a PhD student at Tel-Aviv University and the chief data scientist in the, one of the Hebrew University's data science centers. And with Idan Franco, who's a graduate student in political science. So all the genius is theirs and everything else is mine. Seriously. And what we're trying to say, I guess, maybe is a little against the current in the sense that we looked at the question of polarization. This is a part of a very broad research agenda. I'll present as much as I can until Maoz tells me to that I have to leave the podium. And what we're doing is there's at least two major innovations here. One innovation is theoretical, and I'll get into it, but we'll think about we're thinking about polarization differently than how it's commonly conceptualized. And the other contribution is methodological. So we're looking at big data. We're trying to do away with much of the work that looks at surveys, because we think that work does us a disservice in many ways. Okay, so obviously we can start with the founding fathers. I don't think I need to convince anyone here that polarization has a negative potential for American democracy. The founding fathers said that. We have even recent scholarship showing that it has a destructive influence on how elites interact, may lead to democratic backsliding, has negative impact even on foreign policy. Many of those things were mentioned here today, so we'll move on. Okay, what we're trying to say, okay, is that polarization is often conceptualized or theorized as either ideological, so there's two camps who are ideologically distant from each other, or as affective, where the two camps have all sorts of negative emotions towards each other. So they're afraid of each other, they feel disgusted by the other side, etc. Okay? And another aspect, okay, is that polarization is often conceptualized either as mass polarization or as elite polarization. And we think that much of the sense that polarization is deteriorating, or the conditions in American democracy are deteriorating because of polarization, has a lot to do with elite polarization, and I'm not going to say probably anything about elite polarization here. Okay? The vast majority of our work and the vast majority of what I'm going to show here is about mass polarization. And we're thinking of mass polarization about neither necessarily ideological or affective. Instead, we're trying to look at behavior, okay? And we're arguing that, and this is the way the founding fathers talked about polarization in many ways. They didn't use this term, right? But they were concerned with political behavior. And what is the most prominent political behavior? It is voting. Okay? And I will tell you right at the beginning the two indications for polarization or depolarization, or how we think about polarization when it comes to voting. The first one is the notion that when people vote, if they are willing to switch sides, in the American case it's very easy because you switch from one party to the other. In maybe a multi-party system it might be a little more complicated. I had a meeting with a Belgian scholar today at 7 a.m. in his hotel in Tel Aviv, and obviously in Europe that might look a little different. But the idea that people are willing to vote, to change their vote, okay, and vote with the other side, for us, if they are willing to do it, it's an indication of depolarization. If they're unwilling to do it, it's an indication of polarization. And the other thing that is based on voting is the idea of vote split. Okay? The notion that you're willing to cast a vote for a Republican candidate for the Senate, but for a Democratic candidate for the House. Okay? And the nice thing about it is that it is behavioral. Okay? So I don't need to ask people and come up with solutions to all the biases. We have data, we have big data. We know the 159 million people who voted in 2020. We have data for all of them. Okay, and they're okay. So that's.
Udi, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you explain how do you operationalize
so
polarization? Switching votes is a.
So we were planning this question, and this is exactly what I'm going to talk about.
Okay, all right.
Thanks, Amit.
You have a slide on it.
Yeah, it's not the very next slide, but I'm getting to it, okay? Although I won't have time to talk about the method at length here because we are short on time, but what we think is that when you conceptualize polarization that way, there is a range of questions, okay, that has not been asked and that would allow us to, that we'll be able to explore. So the first one is whether polarization is homogeneous around the country, okay? Certainly in a, in a conference where we talk about the Civil War, okay, or when we talk about polarization today, we talk about polarization in America, but is that really the way we should think about it? Are there various geographical differences? And this is, I guess, the part where I'm going to talk about the most today, okay? Another one is whether polarization is really a monotonic function, where it just increases throughout, okay, or whether this monotonicity is not true, okay? Maybe there are periods where polarization, even the current conditions in America, where polarization is actually not deteriorating, okay? So when we do that, we also have many more units of analysis. Okay, we're not just looking at the country. We can look at the county level. We can look at the state level. We can look at the zip code level. Okay, and then we can do all sorts of analysis. Okay, what predicts polarization? So we don't know about the individual person, maybe, but we know about all the counties in America, and we have information about many other variables in those counties, so we can run all sorts of analysis. We have behavioral measures for elite polarization, right? But we don't have them for, because we know how elected officials vote, okay, on various laws, but we don't have that for the masses so far, so we can juxtapose that, and there's a lot of theory about the relation between mass polarization and elite polarization. And lastly, okay, the fifth question that we could expand on is polarization as it relates to specific parties, which again I think is very pertinent to the kind of discussions that we had here today. So how do we measure that? We think about polarization, this is the last point here. Okay? We think about polarization, we think about two elements. Okay? The first again, I'm going to talk about two behavioral measures. Okay? The first one is about vote switching, the other one is about vote splitting. Okay? When it comes to vote switching, okay, we think about two elements in the electorate. One is the base. Okay? Everybody knows about the political bases. Okay? If you're able to mobilize your base, you're basically increasing polarization. Okay? This is what Trump was able to do in 2016, right? Bringing in people into the political base of the Republican Party that had already, felt hopeless about politics, and he brought them in, mobilized them, created more polarization. The other element is the center. These are the people in the center, okay? Somebody said today that there's 42%, not in this conference, in the conference at Tel-Aviv University, 42% of Americans today identify as independents, okay? Not pure independents, some of them are leaning Democrats, leaning Republicans, but that's a very big number, okay? If those people switch from one party to the other, as we have seen and as we will show you, okay, between 2012 and 2016, between 2016 and 2020, etc., okay, that for us is a strong indication for depolarization. So if they are convinced, okay, that the other party, that they can vote for the other party, that means, whether they're ideologically apart, whether they're affectively apart, if they behave in a way that indicates depolarization, this is very indicative for us for the political process. We do things at the aggregate level. You can talk about ecological fallacy, and our argument is that we're not necessarily looking at individuals, so there's no fallacy here. Okay, we are interested in the aggregate level. We are interested in what happens at the level of the county or the zip code or the state or any aggregate level that we are going to look at. Okay, and again, I'm going to skip this because I guess the findings are really the most important thing for. Okay, one more thing I guess that's very interesting, especially since there's so many historians in the room. Okay, is that if you do that, if you look at voting, okay, and I'll show you the results. So hopefully, I'll be able to convince you some more. Okay, that this is that our argument is valid in various ways. Okay, but if you use voting as a measure for polarization, then you can go back, as far in history as you want. Okay, we know that with surveys, okay, we have limited time in which those surveys were conducted. Even within the time period where the surveys were conducted, questions changed. Politics changed, maybe slightly differently. Technology changed. The media changed, etc. If we want to think about how things changed over time, seriously and we take voting, then we have a measure that is very that is stable and is useful in that sense. Okay, so I promised you some regional angles. So Amichai, to your question, what we do here, I won't go through the entire derivation, okay? But the bottom line here is that our measure is this, okay? Our measure is the absolute value of the margin over turnout, okay? Well, margin is an indication. So turnout is an indication for how strong the base is, right? And margin is an indication for how strong the center is, and we look at the ratio between them, okay? For the specific geographical unit. So what we call the measure is the MPBI, which is the mass mass polarization behavioral index. Okay, the mass polarization behavioral index. What you have here are the distributions, okay, of counties in the United States, starting in 2000 and the shift from 2000 to 2004, all the way down to the shift from 2016 to 2020. This is a dynamic measure, so we look at how people shifted between election cycles, right? So this is what interests us, whether they were convinced or whether they were mobilized, okay? And you can see that, you know, on the, you can see how with the Obama years, okay, it shifted slightly to the left, okay? With Trump, it shifts seriously to the right, and then with Biden, it shifts somewhat back to the left, okay? If you take the regional angle, okay, you can see how all the counties in the United States look like, okay. If we take the map here at the bottom, okay, the map here at the top looks at polarization as it applies to Democratic counties versus Republican counties, and this is some sort of an absolute measure for just how polarized the county is, okay. And you can see that, I won't go into the details here, but you can see that there's lots of variance within the United States in terms of how polarized different parts of the country are. If you look at specific areas, okay, you can see that, okay, you have Vermont and New Hampshire here on the left, and you have Nevada here, okay, and you can see that, you know, Maricopa County, okay, the size of the circle, okay, corresponds to the size of the population of the county, and the color of the circle, as it turns green, okay, it means that the county is less polarized, okay, so more people are likely to shift from one side to the other, okay, there's more people in the center as opposed to the bases of the two parties, and you can see that, you know, everybody talks about Maricopa County, some face validity to show that indeed, you know, this is the county where things happen in Arizona. If you look at shifts over time, okay, just look at one county, okay, this is the yellow line over here, okay, this is Miami-Dade, okay, what you have here are elections from 2004 all the way to 2020. 0 means that this is a depolarized, so it's not polarized, okay, and you can look at Miami, okay, and see how the votes become increasingly polarized, okay, so Latinos vote in 2016, the Latinos vote against Trump. In 2020, when they shift for Trump, okay, you can see how the county become depolarized here. And we have a couple of other interesting counties here, but again, I'm short on time. Okay, now let's look at our other measure. Okay, our other measure is about vote splitting. Okay, and this is updated data from 6 weeks ago. Okay, from the elections in November. What we tried to see here, okay, was the extent to which voters split their ticket, okay, between different office holders, okay, whether it's at the state versus federal level, so this is Senate versus governor, or whether it's at the federal level, okay, between the House and the Senate, okay. So just again, I don't have time to go into details here, but you can see that there's a lot of variance in the across the nation, and if you look at the predictors, okay, these are the predictors, okay. This is zooming in on the top predictors here, okay. So just so you can't really read what's here, okay, but just to get a general impression, okay, you can see that you can systematically explain that. Much has to do with specific states, okay, so these are coefficients for specific states, okay. You can see that they are, so if we talk about regional influences, it is sometimes the state or the specific candidates in the state that determine the extent to which people split their vote or not, okay. And beyond that, you can see if we compare this slide to the next slide, so look, African Americans for instance, here have a negative, so the percent of African Americans have a negative impact on the percent of vote splits, and here it has a positive effect if you look at vote splits at the federal level. Okay, so this is really just the very beginning. We wanted to show you some preliminary analysis, but we think there's a lot there. And just to show you a little, so I promised some optimism in the title. So just to show you some optimism. Okay, so this is the MPBI. So we're going back to the first measure. Okay, for vote splits we go back to the mass polarization behavioral index. Okay, and here you have the vote splits between 2012 and 2016. And here between 2016 and 2020, okay, these are all the counties in the United States colored by the vote share, okay, and you can see that for the most part, many of those counties, okay, are below the diagonal, which means that in between 2016 and 2020, so in 2020, okay, there was a reduction in polarization in many of the counties compared to 2016. So we could talk about, you know, what happened in Georgia and what happened in Pennsylvania, but I guess we'll leave that for the next time. But just a few preliminary conclusions, okay? So mass polarization behavioral index is already a piece that is under review. We think that the vote split is still obviously something that we have a lot to work on. But in terms of homogeneity around the country, there's polarization is different geographically in different parts of the country, okay? We show that at least by our measure, and we can, you know, debate whether you buy that or not, polarization, sorry, is not a monotonous function, but things change over time, not just for the bad, but in many of the counties actually they become less polarized, at least between 2016 and 2020. I didn't really show you the new insights, okay? This was the slide about with Georgia and Pennsylvania, but we think that if you switch between those geographical levels of analysis, you actually get important insights about mass political polarization, and obviously there's a lot to say about how things change over time and between parties, but I'm out of time, so thank you very much.